They always thought their quiet, single daughter would forever remain the obedient doormat for their glittering family facade. But when my father stood up in a five-star Chicago restaurant to publicly exclude me from their lavish ski trip, ordering me to stay behind as unpaid labor for my sister's new mansion, he had no idea he had just armed a time bomb. It would burn his fraudulent empire to ashes before their private jet even left the runway. Hello, wonderful listeners of Maya Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has disabled our monetization, leaving us without the budget to keep this channel running. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking staff to sustain their livelihoods and continue creating these stories for you. You can support us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description or pinned comment of this video. My name is Farah Briggs. I am 31 years old. The dinner celebrating the 30th wedding anniversary of my father, Arthur, and my mother, Eleanor, was held at the most expensive rooftop restaurant in all of Chicago. The atmosphere was incredibly suffocating. Crystal chandeliers hung low from the vaulted ceiling, casting a fractured, glittering light that seemed to perfectly reflect my parents' boundless arrogance. The panoramic windows showcased the sprawling city skyline, a vast empire of glass and steel that my family pretended to own a piece of. I sat quietly at the very edge of the long, silk-draped table. Unlike the rest of them, who were draped in designer labels and excessive jewelry, I wore a practical, charcoal gray business suit. I did not belong in their glittering world, and they made sure I knew it. Across from me sat my younger sister, Chloe, the undisputed princess of the family. She was dripping in diamonds and clinging to the arm of her husband. Trent was a man who loudly and constantly proclaimed himself to be a visionary real estate developer, though his confidence always felt dangerously unearned. The evening dragged on with endless courses of caviar and gold leaf desserts. Finally, Arthur stood up, tapping a silver spoon against his crystal champagne flute. The sharp ringing sound commanded the immediate attention of our private dining alcove. To family, to success, and to a legacy that will last generations, my father declared, his voice booming with the practiced authority of a man who believed he was untouchable. Eleanor and I have decided that to properly celebrate our 30th anniversary and to toast Trent's massive new development project, we are taking the entire family on a 1-month vacation. We have rented an ultra-exclusive, private chalet in Aspen, Colorado. We leave next week. Chloe squealed in delight, throwing her arms around Trent's neck. I took a slow sip of my water. A 1-month trip. That would require significant logistical planning at my firm. That sounds wonderful, I said, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. Could you forward me the flight itinerary and the schedule? I will need to submit my time-off requests at the office by tomorrow morning to arrange my work. The entire table went dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. Chloe looked at me as if I had just spoken in a foreign language. Trent let out a low, breathy chuckle, shaking his head while staring down at his plate. Arthur slowly lowered his champagne glass. The warm, jovial mask he wore just seconds ago vanished, replaced by a stare so cold it could freeze the very air in the room. "Farah, you are not coming," Arthur said. His voice was flat, devoid of any parental warmth. I froze, my hand hovering over my napkin. "I am sorry? Do not make me repeat myself in a public setting," he hissed, leaning closer across the table. "You have no place on this trip. This vacation is a celebration of our family's triumphs and our high society standing. What exactly have you contributed to our image? You are 31, single, and stuck in a dead-end desk job. You are a failure. Farah, you bring absolutely nothing to the table, and frankly, having your dreary presence dragging down our celebration in Aspen is out of the question." The sheer cruelty of his words hit me like a physical blow, but I forced my face to remain completely still. I looked toward my mother for any sign of defense, but Eleanor simply took a delicate sip of her wine. "Your father is right, darling," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You really need to learn your place. But do not worry. We have a very important task for you while we are away. Chloe leaned forward, a malicious smirk playing on her lips. Yes, Farah, Trent and I just closed on our new mansion in the suburbs, but the place is a total mess right now. The contractors need constant supervision, and the interior needs a deep clean before the luxury furniture is delivered. Exactly. Arthur intervened, waving his hand dismissively. Your job is to stay here in Chicago. You will act as the on-site project manager for your sister's new home. You will oversee the renovations, handle the cleanup, and make sure everything is perfect for their return. It is unpaid. Of course, consider it your contribution to the family since you cannot contribute financially. Trent let out a loud, barking laugh, making sure the neighboring tables could hear him. Hey, it is perfect for her. Her little desk job is basically just pushing papers anyway. She could use some real physical labor. Maybe it will build some character. Just be grateful we still include you in family dinners. Farah, Eleanor added, patting my hand with her cold, heavily ringed fingers. Be a good sister, do the work, and stop complaining. They sat there, radiating superiority, utterly convinced that I was nothing more than their obedient, pathetic doormat. They expected me to cry, or perhaps to argue, only to eventually fold and accept my punishment like I always had in the past. Instead, I looked at Arthur, I looked at Eleanor, then I looked at the smug, punchable faces of Chloe and Trent. I smiled. It was a soft, compliant smile that reached exactly nowhere near my eyes. Of course, I replied quietly. I understand completely. I will take care of the house. I picked up my fork and took another bite of my meal, savoring the absolute silence that followed my surrender. They returned to their loud, boastful conversation, completely unaware of the lethal secret I held. They did not know that just hours ago, I had stumbled onto a digital trail that would ruin them all. Let them have their champagne. Let them dream of Aspen. They had just handed me the keys to their destruction, and I was going to burn their glittering empire to the ground. The very next morning, my phone buzzed at exactly 6 o'clock. It was a brief text message from Eleanor, completely devoid of any basic greeting, simply ordering me to present myself at their primary estate in the Gold Coast neighborhood. When I arrived, she barely looked up from her expensive tablet, waving me dismissively toward Arthur's mahogany-paneled home office. She wanted the entire security server reconfigured so they could monitor the perimeter from their smartphones while lounging in their Colorado chalet. To them, I was just a convenient, free technical support girl, a glorified cable technician who could not afford to say no. Make sure the video feed from the rear courtyard is crystal clear, Eleanor commanded from the doorway, holding a cup of artisan coffee. And do not track mud onto the Persian rug. When you are done, lock the side door. I have an exclusive spa appointment. Understood, I replied, booting up the primary desktop computer. She walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the imported marble floor, completely oblivious to who she had just led into the very heart of their digital network. They mocked my desk job. They genuinely thought I spent my days filing invoices and organizing spreadsheets for some mediocre middle-tier accounting firm. They had absolutely no idea that I was a senior data analyst at Vertex Financial Recon. My firm did not do personal taxes. We were a highly classified private financial intelligence agency. We actively tracked laundered money, offshore shell corporations, and cartel-backed slush funds for multinational conglomerates. I spent my days dissecting deeply encrypted ledgers and dismantling digital fortresses. Setting up a civilian-grade security camera system for them was like asking a neurosurgeon to apply a small bandage. Once I heard the heavy front door click shut, my entire demeanor instantly shifted. The compliant, quiet daughter vanished, replaced immediately by the apex predator of Vertex Financial. I pulled a specialized biometric flash drive from my blazer pocket, inserted it into the mainframe of Arthur's desktop, and executed a localized packet sniffer. It took me exactly 4 minutes and 20 seconds to bypass the administrative firewall. Arthur was incredibly arrogant in the real world, and that massive ego translated directly to his digital security protocols. He used the exact same recycled passwords for his offshore banking portals as he did for his local country club memberships. I burrowed deep into the network architecture, completely bypassing the standard hard drive partitions, until I located a hidden, localized server block buried under a fake system registry. It was secured with a basic encryption protocol that must have been configured over a decade ago. I ran a brute force decryption script, sitting in silence as I watched the green lines of code cascade across the black monitor. Within 10 minutes, the firewall shattered into pieces. What I uncovered inside that drive was a digital graveyard of absolute financial ruin. I opened the master ledger for Trent's supposedly booming real estate empire. The numbers did not just look bad, they were apocalyptic. There was no new luxury development. There was no visionary expansion into the commercial sector. Trent was running a massive textbook Ponzi scheme. He was actively using the buy-in capital from his newest, unsuspecting investors to pay off the delayed dividends of his early backers. Meanwhile, he was secretly siphoning the overflow to fund Chloe's diamond necklaces, his leased Italian sports cars, and his ridiculous designer watch collection. But the well had completely run dry. The ledgers clearly showed that Trent was currently sitting on a catastrophic deficit of over $45 million. Worse, he had borrowed heavily from unregulated shadow lenders to cover his tracks. I found encrypted emails, thinly veiled death threats, and frantic wire transfers routed to offshore accounts closely linked to the Chicago underground syndicate. Trent was not a titan of industry. He was a dead man walking, desperately cornered by mob-affiliated creditors who demanded their money back with a brutal 30% interest rate. I kept digging, tracing the emergency cash injections Arthur had been quietly making to keep Trent's sinking ship afloat. Arthur was bleeding cash to protect the fragile family image. But where was Arthur getting this sudden, massive liquidity? I pulled up a highly secured subfolder labeled simply as Legal Directives. When I opened the first digital file, the blood turned to absolute ice in my veins. It was a highly confidential settlement document from a massive medical compensation fund. The primary name on the beneficiary line was Farrah Briggs. My mind violently snapped back to when I was 18 years old. A horrific car crash. A drunk driver had violently struck my sedan at an intersection, leaving me in a deep coma for 3 weeks, which was followed by nearly a year of agonizing, grueling physical therapy. My parents had looked me in the eyes back then and told me the driver was completely uninsured. They claimed they had graciously paid my exorbitant medical bills out of their own personal savings. Holding that massive financial burden over my head for my entire adult life as absolute proof of their endless generosity, the legal document glowing on the screen told a profoundly different, sickening story. The driver was a high-ranking corporate executive for a major international logistics firm. His company had settled quietly and aggressively to avoid a highly scandalous public lawsuit. The final payout was $25 million, but I had never seen a single dime of it. My fingers trembled slightly as I clicked the next file in the directory. It was a formal petition for a medical conservatorship, filed precisely while I was unconscious in the intensive care unit. Arthur had bribed a private physician to declare me permanently mentally incapacitated and severely neurologically compromised. He had expertly forged my signature on the power of attorney documents. A corrupt judge had granted Arthur total, irrevocable control over my entire life, my financial assets, and my medical decisions. For 13 agonizing years, my own father had been legally treating me like a brain-dead ward of the state. He had quietly and systematically drained my $25 million compensation fund, every lavish European vacation, every piece of designer jewelry Eleanor wore, the initial seed money for Trent's fraudulent business, and even that ridiculous rooftop anniversary dinner just last night. It was all paid for with my blood money. They had stolen my entire future, built a glittering empire on top of my physical trauma, and then had the audacity to call me a pathetic failure for not being as wealthy as them. A normal person would have screamed. A normal person would have smashed the expensive monitor, called the police, or confronted their parents in a blind, weeping rage. But I was not a normal person. The analytical algorithms in my head aggressively shifted, locking away the visceral pain and replacing it with cold, absolute strategy. The weak, compliant victim they created died in that hospital bed 13 years ago. The woman sitting in Arthur's luxurious leather chair was a ghost in their digital system, a financial assassin who now held the execution orders for their entire lives. I watched the cursor blink steadily on the screen, feeling a terrifying, euphoric sense of clarity wash over my entire body. The hunt had officially begun. I did not shed a single tear. Crying was a biological response to grief, and I felt absolutely no grief for the people I was about to destroy. My fingers flew across the keyboard with the lethal precision of a surgeon dissecting a rotting organ. I transferred every single fraudulent document, the forged conservatorship signatures, the fake medical evaluations, and the sprawling digital map of their illicit money trails directly onto my military-grade encrypted flash drive. It took exactly 18 minutes to siphon 13 years of their darkest, most damning secrets. Once the transfer was complete, I executed a deep, localized system scrub. I wiped my digital footprints so thoroughly that even a team of federal forensic auditors would find nothing but empty space and standard operating logs. Then, I dutifully configured the perimeter camera feeds, routing the high-definition video directly to Eleanor and Arthur's smartphones, just as I had been explicitly ordered. I wanted them to feel entirely safe. I wanted them to look at their expensive screens from thousands of miles away and see a perfectly secure fortress, completely unaware that the walls had already been permanently breached from the inside. Before logging out of the mainframe, one final, heavily guarded email chain caught my attention. It was buried deep in a draft folder, tagged with a routing number I instantly recognized from my highest-level investigations at Vertex Financial. I ran a quick decryption thread and read through the frantic, thinly veiled exchanges. The lavish one-month vacation in Aspen was not a celebration of Trent's fictitious real estate success. It was a desperate, clandestine summit. They were not flying to Colorado to ski or drink overpriced champagne. They were flying there to meet with a notorious shadow banker who operated out of Denver. Trent's mafia-affiliated creditors were closing in fast, demanding immediate repayment of the $45 million he had squandered. Arthur was preparing to make one final, devastating sacrifice to save his golden son-in-law from a brutal end. They were going to leverage the very last piece of commercial real estate tied to my hijacked medical trust, a downtown plaza worth nearly $10 million, and sign it over to the underworld as collateral. They were literally preparing to sell the last drop of my stolen blood to keep Trent from being buried in a concrete foundation. I pulled my secure burner phone from my pocket and dialed a direct, unlisted line. It rang only twice before a gravelly, impatient voice answered the call. "Speak," Marcus commanded. Marcus was not just a corporate attorney. He was a ruthless federal prosecutor who had built his entire terrifying reputation by dismantling elite financial crime syndicates. We had collaborated on several high-profile corporate takedowns in the past, and he possessed the exact kind of merciless legal mind I needed for this operation. "Marcus, it is Farah," I said, keeping my voice hushed but entirely steady. "I have a massive, airtight case for you. It involves systemic wire fraud, a forged medical conservatorship, and a $45 million Ponzi scheme intersecting heavily with underground syndicates." "Who is the target?" he asked, his tone sharpening with immediate, predatory interest. "My own family," I replied, staring at the blank monitor of my father's desk. "I need an ex parte injunction filed by tomorrow morning. I want every single bank account, every offshore credit line, and every physical asset bearing the names of Arthur, Eleanor, and Trent completely frozen under federal authority. I want it done completely silently. They cannot know the blade is dropping until it is already buried deep in their necks." "Send me the encrypted files over the secure server," Marcus replied, clearly thrilled by the prospect of the kill. "I will have a federal magistrate sign the freeze order within 24 hours. They will not be able to buy a cup of coffee by the time I'm done." With the federal trap securely set in motion, I needed to maintain my pathetic cover to ensure they boarded that plane. for the next 2 days. I played the role of the dutiful, beaten-down daughter flawlessly. I drove my practical 5-year-old sedan out to the sprawling suburban property Chloe and Trent had recently purchased. The mansion was a chaotic, dusty construction zone, filled with loud contractors and half-finished plumbing. I rolled up the sleeves of my cheap cotton blouse and went to work. I organized their complex delivery schedules, swept the hardwood floors of the grand foyer until my hands blistered, and took continuous verbal abuse from their arrogant head carpenter without a single complaint. When Chloe called me on the second afternoon to shriek about the slightly incorrect shade of her imported Italian bathroom tiles, I apologized profusely, my voice dripping with fake submission, and promised to fix it immediately out of my own pocket. I swallowed my pride and scrubbed the thick grime off their massive marble countertops, smiling softly to myself the entire time. I was not cleaning my sister's new luxury home. I was carefully polishing the tombstone of their fake empire. They honestly thought they had successfully trapped me in the dirt, but they had merely placed me in the absolute perfect position to pull the rug right out from under them. The morning of their departure was bitterly cold, the kind of biting Chicago wind that cut straight through the thin fabric of the cheap, oversized sweater I was wearing to maintain my pathetic disguise. I stood on the porch of the unfinished suburban property, holding a cheap plastic broom, waiting for my sister and her husband to do their final walkthrough. A violently loud, custom-painted Italian supercar roared up the gravel driveway, kicking up dust before screeching to a halt. The doors swung upward, and Chloe stepped out, dressed in an utterly ridiculous floor-length faux fur coat designed for a runway, not an airport terminal. Trent followed, wearing a tailored cashmere overcoat and sunglasses that likely cost more than my supposed annual salary. Chloe marched straight up the steps and shoved a massive, heavy, leather-bound binder into my chest. It felt like it contained at least 200 pages. "Here is the comprehensive manual for the house," Chloe demanded, her voice sharp and nasal. "I have color-coded the daily cleaning schedules. You need to focus specifically on the imported marble in the master bathroom. And please, Farah, if the high-end furniture delivery team arrives, do not stand around looking like that. You look like a homeless person. It is embarrassing. At least try to look presentable when dealing with our vendors." I gripped the heavy binder, offering her a weak, apologetic nod. "I will make sure everything is handled exactly to your specifications, Chloe." Trent stepped up beside her, dramatically pulling back his cashmere sleeve to check the time. A massive, diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe watch caught the morning sunlight, flashing with the stolen money of countless defrauded investors and my hijacked medical fund. "We need to get moving, babe," Trent said, letting out a condescending sigh. He looked me up and down, a cruel smirk spreading across his face. "Enjoy your little staycation, Farah. I know your life is incredibly tedious, so try not to die of boredom while we are living it up in Aspen. I expect you to scrub every single tile in this entire house by hand. I want to see my reflection in the floors when we get back in 30 days. Got it?" "I understand completely," I replied, my voice remarkably soft. I forced my lips into a warm, utterly subservient smile. "Have a wonderful flight, both of you. You truly deserve this trip." I stood perfectly still on the porch, my right hand securely gripping the binder and my left hand buried deep inside my pocket, clutching my mobile phone. That small device currently held the absolute power of life and death over their entire existence. I watched their obnoxiously loud sports car back out of the driveway, the engine roaring as it sped off toward the city. I waited until the vehicle completely disappeared over the horizon. The oppressive, arrogant energy they brought with them finally evaporated into the crisp morning air. My compliant smile instantly vanished. I turned around, walked directly into the messy foyer, and shoved the heavy leather binder straight into a massive industrial shredder the contractors had left behind. The machine roared to life, violently chewing through Chloe's color-coded demands and spitting them out as worthless confetti. I walked out to my modest sedan, opened the trunk, and pulled out a heavy garment bag. It was time to shed the pathetic, beaten-down skin I had worn for 13 years. I stripped off the cheap sweater and the scuffed denim jeans in their place. I put on a razor-sharp, custom-tailored black power suit, a crisp silk blouse, and a pair of designer stilettos that commanded absolute authority. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, unforgiving style. Looking in the rearview mirror, the victim was entirely gone. The apex predator had finally arrived. I slid into the driver's seat and merged onto the interstate, heading directly toward the business-class terminals of O'Hare International Airport. My phone rang through the Bluetooth speakers. It was Marcus. The federal magistrate just officially signed the ex parte injunction, Marcus stated, his voice buzzing with dangerous anticipation. The freeze order is completely locked and loaded into the federal banking network. Every single account, every line of credit, and every offshore reserve under Arthur, Eleanor, and Trent is primed for immediate lockdown. I am sitting at my terminal, holding my finger directly over the execution key. Just give me the word. Farah. I accelerated into the fast lane, my eyes fixed sharply on the towering airport structures looming in the distance. Keep your finger on that key, Marcus, I replied, my tone as cold as absolute zero. I am going to look them directly in the eyes when the lightning strikes. The heavy glass doors of the O'Hare International First Class Lounge parted silently. I stepped onto the plush carpet, the sharp click of my stilettos instantly cutting through the low murmur of the elite travelers. My family was holding court in the absolute center of the room. They were clustered around a velvet booth, loudly clinking flutes of vintage champagne, completely ignoring the irritated glances from the wealthy patrons around them. Arthur was laughing, a booming, obnoxious sound, while Eleanor adjusted the collar of Chloe's ridiculous faux fur coat. I walked slowly toward them, letting the sheer magnetic force of my presence announce my arrival. Eleanor noticed me first. The crystal glass slipped slightly in her hand, spilling champagne onto her designer skirt. Her eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated horror as she took in my custom-tailored suit and my icy, commanding posture. I was no longer the pathetic ghost in the oversized sweater. Arthur followed her gaze, his jaw practically unhinged. Farah? What on earth are you doing here? You are supposed to be at the house. I did not answer him. My eyes were fixed firmly on Trent. He was standing at the mahogany concierge desk a few feet away, aggressively tapping his platinum credit card on the marble surface. I told you, I want the 4 seats upgraded to the ultra-premium suites, Trent barked at the terrified airline agent. Charge the extra $20,000 to this card. Hurry up. The agent swiped the heavy metal card. The terminal emitted a loud, harsh red beep. I am sorry, sir, but this card has been declined, the agent said, her voice shaking slightly. Trent slammed his fist on the desk. Run it again. The machine is broken. Do you have any idea who I am? The agent swiped it a second time. Another loud, echoing beep. Sir, it says the account is completely frozen by the issuing institution. Arthur marched over, his face flushed with immediate anger. Stand aside. Trent, this airline always hires incompetent staff. Arthur pulled a heavy titanium card from his leather wallet and tossed it onto the counter. Put it on my private reserve account, and I expect a formal apology. The agent carefully inserted Arthur's card. A sharp beep echoed out. Declined. Eleanor gasped, rushing to the desk and throwing her own premium shopping card at the agent. Another beep. Declined. The entire VIP lounge suddenly went dead silent. The wealthy businessmen and socialites stopped pretending to read their financial newspapers. Every single eye in the room was now locked onto the humiliating spectacle of my family failing to purchase a seat upgrade. I walked smoothly up to the concierge desk, sliding perfectly between Arthur and Trent. I picked up a bottle of imported sparkling water from the display tray. I withdrew my sleek, black corporate card and tapped it against the digital reader. A soft, pleasant chime rang through the quiet room. Approved. It seems I am the only person in this entire family who can actually afford a $3 bottle of water today, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the lounge. Trent grabbed my shoulder, his fingers digging into my blazer. What did you just do? What is going on with the accounts? I smoothly slapped his hand away, turning to face him fully. The look in my eyes made him instantly take a step backward. "Your accounts are gone." "Trent," I stated, raising my voice just enough so the surrounding crowd could hear every single word. "Every single penny, your offshore shells, your fake holding companies, and the new investor capital you just stole last week. It is all frozen under a federal injunction." Trent's face drained of all color. He began to sweat profusely, large droplets forming on his forehead. "You are insane. You do not know what you are talking about." "I know about the $45 million deficit," I countered, stepping directly into his personal space, forcing him to cower. "I know about the Ponzi scheme you have been running for 5 years. And I know you are not flying to Aspen to go skiing. You are flying to Denver to beg a shadow banking syndicate for mercy because you owe them millions at a brutal 30% interest rate. You are completely bankrupt. Trent, you are a massive fraud." Trent opened his mouth, his lips trembling violently, but absolutely no sound came out. He collapsed backward into a leather chair, clutching his chest as if he were having a heart attack. Chloe let out a piercing, hysterical scream. "You malicious, jealous freak! You did this to us!" She lunged at me, raising her hand to slap me directly across the face. My reflexes were instantaneous. I caught her wrist mid-air, my grip tightening like a steel vise until she gasped in sharp pain. I yanked her forward, bringing my face mere inches from hers. "Do not ever raise your hand to me again," I whispered, though the sheer malice in my tone carried across the quiet room. "Every single thing you are wearing right now, the diamond earrings, the designer coat, the massive suburban mansion you just bought, is stolen property. You built your entire pathetic princess fantasy using the $25 million medical settlement that Arthur stole from me when I was lying in a coma 13 years ago." I shoved her backward. Chloe stumbled, her high heels catching on the carpet, and crashed into Eleanor. "That is right," I announced to the entire room, turning to look at my father, who was completely paralyzed with fear. "Arthur forged a medical conservatorship to steal his own brain-damaged daughter's accident compensation. He used my blood money to fund this fake empire, and today, I took it all back." The silence in the lounge shattered entirely. Dozens of smartphones were suddenly raised in the air. The elite patrons, the very people Arthur and Eleanor desperately wanted to impress, were now eagerly recording the spectacular, absolute destruction of our family. Camera flashes blinked rapidly. Whispers of intense disgust and shock filled the air. My parents' glittering, carefully crafted high society reputation was being publicly butchered on high-definition video, instantly transformed into a permanent, pathetic circus for the entire internet to witness. Arthur's face turned a violent, explosive shade of crimson. The sheer terror of being exposed in front of Chicago's highest society instantly mutated into a desperate, rabid fury. He lunged forward, pointing a trembling finger directly at my face, screaming at the top of his lungs. "Someone call airport security right this instant," Arthur roared, his voice cracking under the immense strain. "Arrest this lunatic. She is having a psychotic breakdown. She is hacking our personal banking accounts and spreading malicious slander. Get the guards here right now and have her physically dragged out of this terminal." I did not flinch. I did not step back. Instead, I calmly unlatched the heavy brass clasp of my leather briefcase. I pulled out a thick, meticulously organized stack of printed documents and slammed them down onto the polished mahogany table with a resounding thud that echoed through the dead silence of the VIP lounge. "Call them," I challenged, my voice deadly and perfectly measured. "Call security, Arthur. But you might want to read the front page first, because that is a certified copy of a federal asset freeze order signed at 8 o'clock this morning by a United States District Court judge, and right beneath it is a forensic copy of the medical conservatorship you fraudulently filed 13 years ago, complete with the forged signatures of my attending neurologist and the illegal transfer logs of my $25 million accident compensation." Arthur stared down at the documents, his eyes locked onto his own forged handwriting, printed in stark black and white. The remaining color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow, terrified corpse. His knees visibly buckled, and he had to grab the edge of the table just to remain standing. "You really thought you were boarding a luxury jet to Colorado today," I continued, stepping even closer, forcing him to look me in the eyes. "You thought you were going to fly away and sell off the last remaining piece of my stolen future to a shadow syndicate to save yourselves. But there is no flight to Aspen. The gate agents have already flagged your boarding passes. There are heavily armed special agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation currently stationed at every single exit of this terminal, waiting for my signal. You are not going on a 1-month ski vacation. You are going to a federal penitentiary for the rest of your miserable lives." The absolute reality of my words finally shattered the last remaining pieces of their delusion. The explosion that followed was spectacular. Trent leaped up from his chair, his eyes wide with wild, animalistic panic. He turned entirely on Arthur, grabbing the older man by the lapels of his expensive suit. "This is your fault," Trent screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "You promised me the capital was secure. You told me the medical fund was an endless well. You forced me to expand the business to keep up your ridiculous country club facade. You dragged me into this mess. You arrogant old fool." Arthur violently shoved Trent backward, knocking him into a display of expensive liquors. Glass shattered across the floor. "You incompetent parasite," Arthur yelled back, completely losing his mind in front of the dozens of recording cameras. "I gave you millions of dollars and you squandered every single penny of it. You could not build a real estate empire if your life depended on it. You ruined my family. You destroyed my legacy." They were clawing at each other, cursing, and violently throwing blame like cornered rats in a sinking ship. The wealthy patrons around them recoiled in utter disgust, whispering harshly as the true, rotting core of my family was laid bare for the entire world to witness. There was no grace. There was no dignity. There was only the pathetic reality of two con artists realizing their run was completely over. Eleanor fell to her knees. The proud, haughty matriarch, who had treated me like a useless servant just 24 hours ago, was now crawling across the stained carpet. Her mascara ran down her cheeks in thick, dark rivers. She grabbed the hem of my tailored trousers, her hands shaking violently. "Farah, please," Eleanor sobbed, her voice a pathetic, wheezing gasp. "You cannot do this to us. We are your flesh and blood. We are your family. Please, call the lawyers. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Withdraw the petition. I beg you, darling. You cannot send your own father to prison." Chloe dropped down right beside her, abandoning her ridiculous faux fur coat on the floor. "Please, Farah, I will give the house back. I will give you all the jewelry. Just make the agents go away. I cannot go to jail. I cannot be poor. We are sisters." I looked down at the two women weeping at my feet. For 13 years, I had craved their love. I had desperately wanted a mother who protected me and a sister who cared about my existence. But looking at them now, I felt absolutely nothing. The well of my empathy was bone dry. I carefully stepped backward, pulling my leg out of Eleanor's desperate grip. "You are not my family," I said, my voice ringing with absolute, terrifying finality. "My family died in a hospital room 13 years ago when you looked at my broken, comatose body and saw nothing but a massive payday. You made your choices. Now, you get to live with them." I turned my back on them. I did not look back when the heavy glass doors of the lounge were violently pushed open. I did not flinch when a dozen federal agents in tactical gear stormed into the room, shouting aggressive commands. I walked out into the main terminal, my head held high, listening to the deeply satisfying sound of heavy steel handcuffs locking tightly around the wrists of Arthur and Trent, and the agonizing, hysterical wails of my mother and sister as they realized they were now completely homeless, penniless, and utterly destroyed. 6 months later, I sat on the expansive wooden balcony of an ultra-exclusive, private chalet nestled high in the snow-capped mountains of Aspen, Colorado. A massive stone fireplace crackled warmly behind me. I took a slow, deliberate sip from a glass of vintage red wine, looking out over the breathtaking expanse of the valley. My stolen compensation fund had been entirely recovered and legally restored to my name with full, devastating interest. Arthur and Trent were sitting in federal holding cells, facing multiple decades of hard time without the possibility of parole. Eleanor and Chloe were living in a cramped, rotting apartment on the far outskirts of the city, working minimum wage shifts just to afford their basic groceries. I smiled, breathing in the crisp, freezing mountain air. They had tried to turn me into their permanent doormat, but they forgot that the absolute best, most agonizing form of revenge is not just destruction, it is massive, radiant success, and the pure, unadulterated taste of total freedom. Thank you so much to everyone for staying with me and listening to this story until the very end. I would love to know where in the world you are listening from today, so please let me know in the comments below. As I mentioned earlier, our channel is currently operating without any monetization from YouTube. If you found today's story engaging and satisfying, please consider helping us out with a small donation of just $1. Your kindness allows us to pay our incredible staff so that they can support their families and keep bringing you more thrilling stories just like this one. You can easily support us by scanning the QR code right here on your screen, or by clicking the secure donation link provided in the description box and the pinned comment below. Thank you again, and I will see you all in the next story.